The Chernobyl accident was a catastrophic nuclear accident that occurred on April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukraine. Ukraine at the time was under the control of the Soviet Union. On the day of the catastrophe, an explosion caused a fire and released large amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The radioactive material then spread over most of Europe. The Chernobyl disaster was the worst nuclear power plant accident in history in terms of casualties. It is one of the only two power plant accidents classified as a level 7 event on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the other one being the nuclear disaster in Japan in 2011. There were 500,000 people affected in the efforts to contain the contamination in reaction to the accident. 31 people died during the catastrophe, and many more were affected by the contamination itself. The number of people that have been affected in the long term is still unknown.
On the day of the accident, the fourth reactor at the power plant experienced a 7-power increase. This led to nuclear explosions in the core of the reactor, releasing deadly amounts of radiation. The explosion led to the ignition of a graphite moderator, which in turn led to an even more toxic amount of radiation, which was released into the atmosphere and carried by the wind. After the incident, the Soviet Union neglected to spread the news that there was an explosion. However, nearly 1,000 miles from Chernobyl, Sweden was the first country to detect that something disastrous had happened. Cesium-137, the radioactive material that was emitted by the reactor, had spread hundreds of miles and contaminated thousands of cities. The result was and still is devastating. Belarus was by far one of the worst places affected with life-changing ailments. Some of the effects are illnesses like thyroid cancer, birth defects, dysplasia, deformation, and intellectual disabilities.
Chernobyl now is a wasteland. What was once a populous and working society is now abandoned into ruins. At the time, Chernobyl was relatively new. Everyone worked and the city was there to maintain the numerous jobs needed for the power plant. Additions to the power plant were still under construction and now seem to be stopped in time. Everything in this city is how the inhabitants left it. Everyone left to escape the catastrophe. Personal items are still there to prove that something once existed. Speculations grew outside the Soviet Union that something catastrophic had happened to a nuclear power plant, but the Soviet Union was keeping everything a secret. They even kept their own people in the dark, barely admitting to anything while they tried to cover everything up. But in reality, this was way too big to hide. The Soviet Union slowly started releasing information confirming the allegations against them.
It is estimated that the Soviet Union spent $18 billion on containment and decontamination, virtually bankrupting itself. Belarus is estimated to have spent $235 billion over the course of 30 years. Between 5 and 7% of the Ukrainian government spending is related to Chernobyl. The country of Belarus has spent $13 billion between 1991 and 2003. Most of the costs now are payments of Chernobyl-related social benefits to some 7 million people across 3 countries. Politically, the accident forged stronger ties between the U.S. and Soviet Union through bioscientific cooperation. But the disaster became a major factor in the eventual downfall of the Soviet Union in 1991, and a great influence in shaping the new Eastern Europe.